You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to episode 43 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. Normally I begin by talking about the games or basketball topics, but not today. I'm going to start by saying rest in peace, obviously, to Aaron Popovich. You know, I've said a lot of things about Greg Popovich regarding his coaching or whatever, but that's so insignificant compared to life and death. And to anybody that's ever lost anybody that's meant anything to them, you'll understand that, you know, we get caught up in the basketball world. We watch coaching decisions, we think it means everything, and it's very consequential to life and death, and it's really not. And whenever somebody dies, that really puts it in perspective. So obviously, my heart and condolences go out to the entire Popovich family. And it sounds from some of these reports that she had a significant illness, which was probably cancer, or it could have been, you know, kidney disease or heart disease. But it sounds like she was in a battle for quite some time. So, and sometimes people, when somebody will pass away, they will say, "Oh, well, they're not suffering anymore." And it almost becomes cliche at times, or corny. But in this situation, it sounds like she probably was suffering quite a bit. So I'm not saying that I'm glad she passed away or anything like that. I would never say that about anybody. But if there is a silver lining to all this, is that she's not suffering anymore. So once again, rest in peace to Aaron Popovich, and thoughts and prayers are to the entire Popovich family, and that of course includes Greg Popovich. Game 2 between Oklahoma and Utah came out with a sense of urgency and desire, which you would expect considering they lost game 1. And they did a great job of taking Oklahoma's best shots or best punches when they were coming back without panicking. Utah got off to a hot start and they were up 7-0 to begin the game, and then Oklahoma tied it at 9, so they went on a 9-2 run. And Oklahoma looked at times like they were on the verge of really exploding in this game, especially in the third quarter. But once again, Utah did a really good job of taking those punches from Oklahoma, and they didn't panic, and they responded to every single run. The Jazz did a really good job in bottling up Westbrook, George, and Anthony, and they were a combined 19 of 58. No, I did check that stat. I knew they shot badly, but when I was looking at the box score, yes, that's a correct statistic. 19 of 58 from the field. I mentioned in the previous episode how Utah was in a tough spot because do you press up on these guys? Because if you press up on them and they go right by you, they get into the rim and they're either getting Gobert in foul trouble, or you're getting offensive rebounds for Steven Adams. And one of the real underrated things that happened in this game was the foul trouble of Steven Adams. And because Steven Adams wasn't on the court a whole lot of the time, that allowed Rubio, that allowed Exum and Mitchell and whoever else was on the perimeter for Utah to really get in the face of the Oklahoma City perimeter players and pressure the ball. And if they got by them, then of course Gobert was able to affect their shot. And they weren't getting burned on the offensive glass because, as I said, Adams was in foul trouble. So right there, you were able to see the actual impact and importance that Steven Adams has in the game, even without getting touches, well, at least from a conventional standpoint, on the offensive end. Of course, if he gets an offensive rebound, he's getting touches on the offensive end, but he has to go out there and get it. It's not like they're running plays for him. Now, what I'd like to see from Oklahoma's standpoint is if Adams gets into foul trouble again, maybe not panic and book Grant in for 30 minutes. Maybe look for Patterson, because Patterson, although he's not a great rebounder on either end of the floor, so he's not going to get you offensive rebounds, he can spread the floor out. And when you have good rebounding from Carmelo, Paul George, Russell Westbrook, you're not in a situation where you have to replace a rebounder with a rebounder. You can bring in Patterson. And because of Patterson's ability to shoot the ball, especially in the corners, it might mean that Gobert or Favors, whoever's guarding him, will be one step away from the rim. And that means that if Westbrook or Paul George is able to beat the pressure and get to the front of the rim, maybe Gobert or Favors aren't there to challenge because they have to be worried about that shot. Now, if they are closer, then that means you have pretty good looks from the corner, especially if you have Melo on the other corner, to capitalize on that. Once again, in a long playoff series, I wouldn't recommend it, but if it's for short spurts with Steven Adams on the bench, I would rather that than playing Jeremy Grant for 20, 30 minutes. I don't think he's ready for that, and I don't think his game, he's good at finishing around the rim, but he can't really impact a game the way that Steven Adams' offensive rebounds can, or Patterson's outside shooting can. And the other change I'd make if I was Oklahoma is, I mentioned him just a second ago, is Carmelo Anthony. And they've got to get him into situations. I don't mean throwing the ball on the block to him. I think he needs to play a little bit more foul line extended, mid-range, off the ball. So when he's catching and shooting, he's catching and shooting from 20 feet out as opposed to 25 feet out. He was 2 of 9 from three-point territory, and that's too much. And he's been inconsistent all year long. If his 3 was on all year long, I could live with him going 2 of 9 and say, look, it's just one bad game. And you'd live with that if you're Oklahoma. But we have to understand, and Melo has to understand, that he's essentially a role player now. The Thunder should not be living or dying on Carmelo Anthony's 3-point shot. And they pretty much did live or die with Carmelo's 3-point shot today. 2 of 9, that's not good enough. And they need to change that up. They need to put him in a different area of the court, so he's not catching and shooting from 3. He's catching and shooting from mid-range, which he's still pretty much automatic from. The final adjustment that I'd make if I was Oklahoma is a much more concerted effort on Rubio. Ricky Rubio dictated the flow of the game today and finished with 22, 9, and 7. Of course, 9 assists, 7 rebounds there when I'm referring to those numbers. And there's no excuse for that. Not when you have such good perimeter defenders as Paul George and Russell Westbrook showed towards the end of the regular season that he has the ability to really get after people defensively. I mean, we all saw that Houston Rockets game, which they pretty much had to win, by the way. And he was guarding James Harden. It wasn't Paul George that was guarding him. And he did a fantastic job on James Harden. So there's no... Look, Westbrook has to... We've seen him take on challenges before, whether it's carrying a team to the playoffs without Kevin Durant or whatever. But I want to see him accept this challenge of not letting Rubio dictate the flow of the game anywhere near what he did in today's game. Because there's no excuse for that. Because Westbrook has all the ability in the world to lock him down. And he needs to do that. There's no excuse. If I'm Utah, I've got to love the situation that I'm in right now. They were able to win today despite terrible shooting from Donovan Mitchell, although he came up big down the stretch getting to the foul line. But their execution was so much crisper than what it was in Game 1. And the one thing I did like, and I did notice that they changed, was Derek Favors was hitting the offensive glass a lot more, and that's a huge advantage for him, especially if Carmelo continues to guard him. He had 8 offensive rebounds, and when a game is decided by 3 points or less, 8 offensive rebounds is a big difference. It's a significant factor. So going forward, this is turning into a fantastic series, especially now that New Orleans has a stranglehold on their series. This is the series that I'm watching the most now, watching the closest now. Out in the East, we saw Indiana versus Cleveland in Game 2 of that, and LeBron came out uber aggressive, which everyone kind of predicted, and he scored Cleveland's first 16 points. He finished with 29 at the half and 46 overall, and I think this is the most he's scored in the playoffs since that historic Game 6 in Boston in the 2012 Conference Finals. Now, did he take the foot off the accelerator? He scored 16 points in the first couple of minutes, 29 at half, 46 overall. I mean, realistically, of course he took his foot off the accelerator. I think he wanted to send a message to the Pacers like, hey, you still got to deal with me. I'm still a good scorer. And as I said, realistically, you can't expect anyone to keep up that pace for a game, let alone a playoff series or a playoff run. So, of course, he had to take his foot. Kind of like Dwayne Wade. Dwayne Wade scored 20 points in the second quarter of their last game. But then, he only scored 8 or 9 points the rest of the game. But he picked and chose his spots. LeBron didn't have to do that in this game. He didn't have to step it up in the fourth quarter to get them back over the hump. or to create separation. But had he had to, I'm pretty sure he would have. This was a must-win for them. Now, after the hot start by Cleveland and LeBron, Indiana did find their rhythm. Cleveland did lead by 15 after the first, but Indiana only lost by 3 points. And they were chipping away each quarter. They won every single quarter, but the lead was just too much to overcome. Oladipo cooled off significantly from his first game, and he only shot 2 of 8 from 3-point range. I just ripped on Carmelo for going 2 of 9, and he had 6 turnovers. A slightly better game from him, and this might have been a very different story, although I think Cleveland was never truly in danger of losing this game, and I think the 3-point margin is a little bit complimentary towards the Pacers. It felt like more of a double-digit game throughout, even though it finished a lot closer. Now, if you're Cleveland, obviously you can't rely on LeBron scoring 46 points on 24 shots. And Kevin Love needs to be the man to step up. And he shot 5 of 16 after he played so poorly in Game 1, and that's concerning. Kyle Korver played well, but is he enough to compensate for Kevin Love? For stretches, yes he is, but they need production from their other all-star, which of course is Kevin Love. J.R. Smith, he emerged defensively and played his best since the 2016 finals. And speaking of players from the 2016 finals, another did not play for Tristan Thompson, and unless if there's a plague of foul trouble, I don't think we're going to see him again this series. When we look ahead to games 3 and 4 in Indiana, I think we're going to see close games, but I think Cleveland will win both of them, and I think they'll actually take this series in 5 now. Indiana, I'm not sure what kind of consistent scoring they can rely on in the playoffs outside Oladipo, and when he struggles, their entire offense, unless if you get good performances out of pretty much everybody, they're not competitive. And that's the reason why I actually went with Cleveland to win in a sweep. Now, I wasn't expecting Oladipo to completely dominate Game 1 and the Pacers to jump out as good as they did. But if you're going to ask me which is going to be more indicative of what we're going to see for the rest of the series, Game 1 or Game 2, I'm probably going to lead towards Game 2. And the final game of the night was, of course, the Houston Rockets versus Minnesota. The game hasn't finished yet, but it pretty much is over. We saw a much different game to what we saw in Game 1. We saw James Harden. It was actually flipped on its head. James Harden was the one struggling, and everyone else stepping it up. At some point, they'll get it right, and both they'll all be in rhythm at one point, right? Chris Paul was clearly the best player on the floor, although Gerald Green also contributed huge off the bench. But their defense, everyone talks about their offense and their pace, and myself included, but their defense was really good on a fairly capable Minnesota team. I mean, as I've mentioned before, they've got talent there. You've got Jimmy Butler and Karl Anthony Towns, as well as Taj Gibson and Jeff Teague. These guys can score the basketball. They of course, Jamal Crawford as well. It's not like Indiana without Oladipo, for example. So for them to lock down Minnesota, I think that sends a message to Minnesota that, hey, we're not a one-trick pony here. We can beat you on the defensive side of the ball too. So if you're lining up Houston's chances and you're just concentrating on what they can do offensively and you think, okay, the key to stopping them or to beating them is to lock down James Harden, just look at this game. Because Minnesota pretty much did lock down James Harden, and Chris Paul stepped up, and all the other players stepped up for Houston. You're going to have your hands full regardless of who's playing them in terms of locking them down. And then even if you do lock them all down, they may produce a defensive performance like they've just did today, and they still walk away with a victory. So I think this series is going to end in a sweep. It wouldn't shock me at all if Minnesota is able to win one of the home games, but if it goes beyond 5, then I will be very much surprised. Anyway, guys, thanks a lot for listening. We should be doing another episode again tomorrow, so we're moving along to 44. I never expected I'd be approaching 50 so quickly, and clearly I'm not talking about my age. But yeah, thanks so much for listening. Kate, take care. Enjoy the games. Thank you.